The desert sun blazed mercilessly across the endless asphalt as Jack Morgan gripped the steering wheel of his 18-wheeler, his weathered hands telling the story of 2 decades on America's highways. The familiar hum of the diesel engine was his only companion as he navigated the desolate stretch between Flagstaff and Houston, carrying a load of fertilizers that represented more than just cargo. It was his livelihood, his purpose, his escape from the complexities of a world that had grown too complicated for a simple man like him. Jack had always been a man of few words, preferring the honest silence of the open road to the empty chatter that filled most conversations. The CB radio crackled occasionally with truckers sharing weather updates or warning about speed traps, but Jack rarely participated. He found solace in the rhythmic thrum of tires against pavement, the steady vibration that seemed to massage away the tensions of a life lived in fragments, brief stops at truck stops, hurried phone calls to daughters who barely knew him, and the constant pressure to deliver on time, every time. Today's route through Albuquerque was a calculated gamble. His GPS had suggested the detour to avoid construction delays, promising to save precious hours that could mean the difference between a bonus and a penalty. The landscape outside his window remained unchanged for miles, a tapestry of dust, faded billboards advertising long-closed businesses, and the occasional ghost town that served as a reminder of dreams that had withered under the harsh New Mexico sun. As he downshifted to navigate a particularly worn section of road, Jack's mind wandered to the conversation he'd had with his dispatcher that morning. The company was implementing new tracking systems, tighter schedules, and stricter penalties for late deliveries. At 53, Jack felt the weight of an industry that was evolving faster than he could adapt. Younger drivers with college degrees were being hired, bringing with them knowledge of technology and efficiency methods that made veterans like Jack feel obsolete. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who had spent his adult life moving through space was increasingly feeling stuck in time. His daughters, Sarah and Rebecca, lived lives he barely understood, filled with social media, career ambitions, and relationships that seemed to change as frequently as his roots. Sarah, the eldest at 28, was a marketing executive in Denver, while 25-year-old Rebecca taught elementary school in Phoenix. Both had grown up with an absent father who showed love through birthday cards sent from various state lines and Christmas presents purchased at truck stops. Jack's ex-wife, Linda, had remarried 5 years ago to an accountant named Michael, who attended every school play, every graduation, every family dinner that Jack had missed. The divorce had been amicable. Linda never demanded more than he could give, understanding that the road was both his prison and his salvation. But the guilt remained, a constant passenger that no amount of miles could shake. The small town on the outskirts of Albuquerque appeared like a mirage, its edges blurred by heat waves rising from the asphalt. Jack was searching for Pete's Auto Parts, a shop recommended by his friend Tommy, who swore they had the best prices on replacement parts in the Southwest. The GPS directed him off the main highway onto a street that seemed forgotten by progress itself. Houses stood like weathered sentinels, their paint peeling, their yards overgrown with weeds that had long since given up the fight against the desert's embrace. As Jack slowed to check street numbers, something caught his peripheral vision, a flash of movement against the static landscape. Near the corner of what appeared to be an abandoned laundromat, 3 figures huddled against a brick wall that provided the only shade in an otherwise exposed area. The sight struck him with unexpected force, causing him to unconsciously ease. Off the accelerator, a woman sat with her back against the wall, her arms wrapped protectively around 2 small children who pressed close to her sides. Even from a distance, Jack could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way her shoulders curved inward as if trying to make herself smaller, invisible. Her clothes were wrinkled and dusty, and beside her sat 2 worn plastic bags that seemed to contain everything she owned in the world. The children, a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 and a girl perhaps 5 years old, maintained an unnatural stillness that disturbed Jack more than if they had been crying or playing. There was something in their silence that spoke of experiences no child should have, a premature understanding of a world that could be cruel and unpredictable. Jack found himself pulling over without conscious decision, the truck's air brakes hissing as he came to a complete stop about 50 yards from the family. Through his side mirror, he watched them, noting how the woman's eyes darted occasionally toward the street but never settled on any passing vehicle. She wasn't expecting rescue. She was simply enduring, moment by moment, in the way that people do when hope has been repeatedly disappointed. The logical part of Jack's mind immediately began calculating the implications of stopping. He was already running close to his delivery deadline, and any delay could result in penalties that would eat into his already tight profit margins. The company's new policies were unforgiving, and Jack couldn't afford to accumulate negative marks on his record. At his age, finding another job in trucking would be challenging, and he had no other marketable skills. But as he sat there, engine idling, Jack felt something stirring within him that he hadn't experienced in years, a pull stronger than financial considerations or company policies. Maybe it was the way the little girl's head rested so trustingly against her mother's shoulder, or how the boy's small hand clutched a tattered notebook as if it contained something precious, or perhaps it was simply the recognition of what it meant to be alone in the world, surrounded by a landscape that offered no comfort or promise of better days ahead. Jack turned off the engine and sat in the sudden silence, his hands still gripping the steering wheel as he wrestled with a decision that felt far more significant than simply offering help to stranded travelers. In the distance, heat waves continued their ancient dance above the asphalt, and somewhere in the town's forgotten corners, life continued its relentless march forward. But for Jack Morgan, time seemed suspended, balanced on the edge of a choice that would define not just the remainder of his day, but perhaps the remainder of his life. Chapter 2. The Weight of Compassion. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give like. Tell us from which city you're watching us. Let's continue. Jack's boots hit the hot asphalt with a determination that surprised him. Each step toward the small family felt like crossing into unfamiliar territory, not just physically but emotionally. He had helped stranded motorists before, changing flat tires, jump-starting dead batteries, calling for roadside assistance, but this felt fundamentally different. This wasn't about mechanical problems that could be solved with tools and experience. This was about human suffering that required something he wasn't sure he possessed. As he approached, the woman looked up with eyes that held no expectation of kindness. Her face was younger than he had initially thought, probably in her early 30s, but marked by a weariness that seemed to have aged her beyond her years. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and despite the dust and obvious exhaustion, there was something dignified in the way she held herself, as if determined not to appear defeated, even in defeat. "Ma'am," Jack said softly, removing his baseball cap in a gesture of respect his mother had taught him decades ago. "Are you folks all right? Do you need some help?" The woman's grip tightened protectively around her children, and Jack immediately recognized the defensive posture of someone who had learned that help often came with a price. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady but cautious. "We're fine, thank you. Just resting in the shade." But even as she spoke, Jack could see the contradiction in her words. The children's clothes were dirty, their faces showing the telltale signs of hunger and dehydration. The little girl's lips were slightly chapped, and the boy kept glancing toward Jack's truck with a mixture of curiosity and longing that suggested they had been walking for a considerable distance. "My name's Jack," he continued, squatting down, to bring himself to eye level with the children, making himself less imposing. "I'm a truck driver, and I've been on these roads for a long time. This isn't exactly the safest place to be stranded, especially with little ones." The boy, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "Are you going to call the police?" His voice carried a fear that seemed disproportionate to the question, and Jack noticed how the woman's body tensed at her son's words. "No, son," Jack replied gently. "I was just thinking you might be hungry or thirsty. There's a truck stop about 10 miles from here where you could get something to eat and maybe clean up a bit." For the first time, the woman's careful composure cracked slightly. Her eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away, but not before Jack saw the depth of exhaustion and desperation she was fighting to conceal. "We don't have money for food," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack felt his heart constrict at the admission. Here was a mother, clearly educated and articulate, reduced to admitting to a stranger that she couldn't feed her children. The courage required for such honesty was staggering, and it told him more about her character than hours of conversation might have revealed. "Well," Jack said, standing slowly and brushing dust from his knees, "I was planning to stop there anyway for lunch. Company policy says I can't drive more than 11 hours without a break, and I've got about an hour left on my clock. Seems to me it would be more enjoyable to have some company while I eat." The woman studied his face, intently searching for signs of deception or hidden motives. Jack understood her caution. A woman alone with 2 children had to be suspicious of every offer of help, no matter how well-intentioned it might appear. He had daughters himself, and the thought of them in a similar situation filled him with protective fury. "My name is Emily," she said finally. "Emily Carter. These are my children, Michael and Sophie." The formal introduction felt like a small victory to Jack, a sign that she was beginning to trust him, even if only tentatively. "It's nice to meet you, Emily. Michael, Sophie." He nodded to each child in turn, noting how Michael straightened slightly at being acknowledged directly, while Sophie pressed closer to her mother's side. "There's something you should know," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. "We're not just passing through, we have nowhere to go. I lost my job 3 months ago, and we've been staying wherever we can find shelter. Last night was our second night sleeping outside." The stark honesty of her admission hit Jack like a physical blow. He had assumed they were travelers with car trouble or tourists who had somehow become separated from their transportation. The reality that this family was genuinely homeless, that these children had spent nights sleeping in the open, challenged everything he thought he knew about how such situations developed. "What kind of work did you do?" Jack asked, his trucker's natural skepticism warring with his growing concern for the family. "I was a bookkeeper for a construction company in Odessa," Emily replied. "When my husband passed away last year, I thought I could manage on my own. But the medical bills from his illness ate through our savings, and when the construction industry slowed down, I was one of the first to be let go." Jack noticed how she phrased her husband's situation, passed away rather than any more specific description. There was pain in those words, carefully controlled but evident to someone who had learned to read people during 2 decades of brief encounters on the road. "The children's father was in the National Guard," Emily continued, seemingly reading Jack's unspoken questions. "He did 2 deployments overseas before his illness. We thought his benefits would be enough to get us through difficult times, but bureaucracy moves slowly, and bills don't wait for paperwork to be processed." Michael, who had been listening to his mother's explanation with the serious expression of a child forced to mature too quickly, suddenly spoke up. "Mama tried to get help at the churches and the government offices, but they said we had to wait for space in the shelters. But there's always people waiting ahead of us." Sophie, emboldened by her brother's words, added in a small voice, "I'm really hungry and my feet hurt from walking." The simple, direct needs expressed by the children cut through any remaining hesitation Jack might have felt. These weren't abstract problems that could be solved with phone calls or referrals to social services. These were immediate human needs: hunger, fatigue, the basic requirements for survival that every parent understands. "All right then," Jack said, his decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. "Let's get you folks something to eat and figure out what comes next. My truck's right over there, and I promise you'll be safe." As they gathered their few belongings and walked toward the truck, Jack felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just a driver moving cargo from point A to point B. He had become part of someone else's story, and the outcome was far from certain. Chapter 3. Sanctuary in the Desert. The truck stop emerged from the desert, heat like an oasis of civilization, its neon signs flickering against the pale blue sky. Don Martin's Desert Haven had been serving truckers and travelers for over 30 years, and Jack had been stopping there since his early days on the road. The familiar sight of the weathered building, with its attached diner, fuel pumps, and small motel, brought a sense of comfort that he hoped would extend to his unexpected passengers. Emily sat in the passenger seat with Sophie on her lap, while Michael pressed his face to the window, marveling at the size of the truck's cab and the view from so high above the ground. It was the first time Jack had seen either child smile, and the transformation in their faces reminded him of his own daughters when they were young, full of wonder at the world's simple pleasures. Don runs this place, Jack explained as he maneuvered the truck into a parking space designed for vehicles of his size. He's good people, been helping folks. Out here for longer than most of us, have been driving these roads. As they climbed down from the cab, Jack noticed how Emily instinctively positioned herself between her children and the other customers, moving through the parking lot. Her defensive posture spoke of experiences that had taught her to be wary of strangers, even in seemingly safe environments. Jack made a mental note to stay close and make sure she felt protected. The diner's interior was a time capsule from the 1980s, with red vinyl booths, checkered linoleum floors, and the perpetual smell of coffee and fried food that seemed to be permanently embedded in the walls. Don Martin stood behind the counter, his silver hair pulled back in a ponytail, his weathered face breaking into a grin when he spotted Jack. "Well, I'll be damned," Don called out, his voice carrying the easy warmth of an old friendship. "Jack Morgan, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you on this route in months." "Hey, Don," Jack replied, guiding Emily and the children to a booth in the corner where they would have privacy. "Got a special delivery today that required a detour." Don's experienced eyes took in the family with Jack, and without missing a beat, he grabbed 4 menus and a pot of coffee. Years of serving travelers had given him an intuitive understanding of human nature, and he could read the signs of people in genuine need as easily as Jack could read road signs. "Well now, looks like you brought some hungry folks with you," Don said, setting down glasses of ice water for everyone. "What can I get you started with? Coffee for the adults and maybe some chocolate milk for these fine young people." Michael and Sophie looked to their mother for permission, their eyes wide with the kind of hope that comes from unexpected kindness. Emily nodded, and Don disappeared behind the counter, returning moments later with drinks and a basket of fresh rolls that he set in the center of the table. "On the house," he said with a wink to the children. "Can't have folks making important decisions on empty stomachs." As Emily helped Sophie tear apart a roll, Jack found himself studying her more closely. In the better lighting of the diner, he could see that she had once been accustomed to a more comfortable life. Her clothes, though worn and dusty, were of good quality, and her mannerisms spoke of education and refinement. This was a woman who had fallen from stability into desperation, not someone who had lived on the margins of society. "You said you worked as a bookkeeper," Jack said gently. "That's skilled work. How did you end up in Albuquerque?" Emily's hands stilled over her coffee cup, and Jack saw the familiar tension return to her shoulders. "After David, my husband, after he was gone, things became complicated. There were questions about his military service, investigations that I didn't understand. Suddenly, people who had been our friends started avoiding us. The support we expected from his unit never materialized." She paused, glancing at her children who were absorbed in their food, then continued in a lower voice. "There were men who came to our house asking questions about David's activities during his deployments. They suggested that he might have been involved in something inappropriate, something that could affect his benefits and our eligibility for assistance." Jack felt a chill despite the desert heat streaming through the diner's windows. Military investigations were serious business, and if Emily's husband had been under suspicion for something, it could explain why she and her children had been cut off from the support systems that should have helped them. "What kind of questions?" Jack asked carefully. "They wanted to know about money, about whether David had ever brought home anything valuable from overseas, whether he had maintained contact with foreign nationals. They made it sound like he might have been involved in smuggling or worse." Emily's voice broke slightly. "David was the most honest man I ever knew. He believed in serving his country and doing the right thing, but these men made it seem like his integrity was just a cover for criminal activity." The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a disturbing picture in Jack's mind. If military investigators suspected David Carter of wrongdoing, They might have frozen his benefits, pending the outcome of their investigation. A widow and her children could easily become collateral damage in such a scenario, cut off from financial support, while bureaucrats sorted through allegations and evidence. Did they ever find any proof of wrongdoing, Jack asked. No, Emily replied firmly, because there wasn't any to find, but by the time they concluded their investigation and cleared David's name, I had already lost my job, our home, and most of our possessions. The vindication came too late to save us from the consequences of the suspicion. Don appeared at their table with plates of food, burgers and fries for everyone, with extra portions that seemed designed to provide leftovers for later. As he set down the plates, Jack caught his eye and saw understanding pass between them. Don had seen enough desperate families pass through his establishment to recognize the signs, and he had always been generous with those who needed help most. You know, Don said conversationally, I've got a small room in the back that I usually use for storage. It's got a bed and running water, nothing fancy, but it's clean and private. I was just thinking it might be nice to have someone keep an eye on things back there for a few days. Emily looked up sharply, her expression wary. I can't pay you anything. Didn't ask you to, Don replied with a shrug. Just said I could use someone to keep an eye on things. Might be worth a roof over your head and meals while you figure out what comes next. Jack watched Emily wrestle with the offer, seeing the conflict between her pride and her desperation. Pride had probably been a luxury she couldn't afford for some time, but accepting charity was clearly difficult for someone who had once been self-sufficient. There's no obligation, Jack added softly. Don's helped a lot of folks over the years. It's just what good people do for each other. Michael, who had been listening to the adult conversation while steadily working through his burger, suddenly spoke up. Mama, can we stay here tonight? I'm really tired of sleeping outside. The simple request from her son seemed to break through Emily's resistance. She looked around the diner, taking in the warm lighting, the friendly atmosphere, and the obvious safety of the environment. For the first time since Jack had met her, she allowed herself to appear vulnerable. Just for one night, she said, quietly, until I can figure out what to do next. Don nodded and handed her a key attached to a wooden tag shaped like a cactus. Take your time figuring things out. The desert teaches us that sometimes you need to find shelter and wait for the storm to pass before you can see the path forward clearly. As Emily and the children finished their meal, Jack found himself thinking about his own schedule, his delivery deadline, and the penalties he would face for being late. For the first time in his career, those concerns seemed secondary to something more important, the knowledge that his decision to stop had already changed the trajectory of 3 lives, and perhaps his own as well. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Past. That evening, as the desert sky painted itself in shades of orange and purple, Jack found himself unable to leave. He had called his dispatcher, fabricating a story about mechanical problems that would delay his delivery by at least 24 hours. The lie came easier than he expected, surprising him with his willingness to jeopardize his professional standing for people he had known for less than a day. Emily and the children had settled into the small room behind Don's diner, and for the first time since Jack had found them, they seemed to truly relax. Sophie had fallen asleep almost immediately after her bath, curled up on the bed with a stuffed rabbit that Don's wife had left behind years ago. Michael sat at a small table, carefully drawing in his notebook with a set of colored pencils that Don had produced from somewhere in the diner's storage. Jack sat outside on the diner's back porch with Emily, both of them nursing cups of coffee and watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. The conversation had been quiet, comfortable, filled with the kind of silences that come when 2 people are processing significant events. I keep expecting someone to tell me this isn't real, Emily said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. For months, every person I've asked for help has had reasons why they couldn't. Today I meet 2 complete strangers who offer everything without asking for anything in return. Jack shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with being cast in the role of hero. Don's the one who offered the room. I just gave you a ride. "You did more than that and you know it," Emily replied. "You stopped when everyone else just drove by. You saw us as people worth helping, not as problems to be avoided." In the growing darkness, Jack found it easier to ask the questions that had been weighing on his mind. "Those investigators who came to see you about your husband, do you think they're still watching you?" Emily was quiet for so long that Jack wondered if she had heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm being followed, but I don't know if that's real or just paranoia. When you lose everything and everyone you trusted abandons you, it's hard to tell the difference between genuine threats and your own fear." "What exactly did your husband do in the Guard?" Jack asked gently. "David was a supply sergeant," Emily replied. "He handled logistics, inventory, transportation of materials. During his deployments, he was responsible for tracking valuable equipment and supplies. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was important, and he took it seriously." Jack nodded, understanding that supply sergeants in combat zones handled everything from weapons to electronics to cash disbursements. It was exactly the kind of position that would attract attention from investigators if anything went missing or if there were suspicions of black market activity. "Did he ever mention any problems? Anything unusual happening with his unit?" Emily turned to look at him directly, and in the porch light Jack could see tears glistening in her eyes. 2 weeks before David came home from his last deployment, his best friend and fellow sergeant, Marcus Rodriguez, died in what they called a training accident. David was devastated. He blamed himself, said he should have been there, should have prevented it somehow. She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. After David came home, he was different, not just the usual readjustment problems that soldiers have. This was something deeper. He would wake up at night talking about Marcus, about something they had discovered together. But whenever I asked him about it directly, he would shut down, say it was classified, say I was better off not knowing. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Military personnel died in training accidents, but the timing, just before the end of a deployment, and David's subsequent behavior suggested something more complicated might have been involved. "What kind of illness did David have?" Jack asked carefully. Emily's composure finally cracked completely and she buried her face in her hands. "That's just it," she sobbed. "He wasn't sick. David died in a car accident 6 months after he came home. Single vehicle collision on a straight stretch of highway in perfect weather conditions. The police said he fell asleep at the wheel, but David was the most careful driver I ever knew." The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. Emily had been carefully avoiding the truth about her husband's demise, not because of grief, but because of suspicion. A soldier under investigation dies in a suspicious accident. His widow becomes the focus of continued scrutiny, and she ends up homeless and desperate with no one willing to help her. "Emily," Jack said quietly, "do you think David's accident was really an accident?" She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears but her eyes blazing with suppressed anger. "I think David and Marcus found something during their deployment that someone powerful didn't want revealed. I think Marcus was eliminated to keep him quiet, and when David came home acting strange and asking questions, they decided he was too dangerous to let live." The words hung in the desert air between them, heavy with implication and danger. Jack realized that Emily and her children weren't just homeless, they might be targets. If someone had been willing to eliminate 2 soldiers to protect a secret, a widow and her children would be considered loose ends that needed to be managed. "Have you told anyone else about your suspicions?" Jack asked. "Who would I tell?" "Emily," replied bitterly. "The same military investigators who made it clear they thought David was corrupt. The police who accepted the accident story without question. The social workers who treat me like I'm making up stories to get better benefits." Jack understood her isolation. In a world where official channels had failed her and unofficial support networks had abandoned her, Emily had been left to carry her suspicions and her grief alone. No wonder she had been reluctant to trust his offer of help. Her experience had taught her that kindness often came with hidden costs. "There's something else," Emily continued, her voice growing stronger. "Fell to a 2 months since. Before David died, He gave me a safety deposit box key. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would wait exactly 1 year, then go to the box and take what was inside to someone he trusted. He said it was insurance, that it would protect me and the children if the worst happened. Jack leaned forward in his chair. Have you been to the box? It's been 13 months since David died, Emily admitted. The box is in a bank in Odessa. I was planning to go there when I lost my job, but then the investigators started coming around and I was afraid. I thought if I left town with the children, they might follow us, and whatever David left in that box might be the only protection we have. The pieces of a larger puzzle were beginning to form in Jack's mind. A dead soldier, a safety deposit box, military investigators, and a family running from shadows. It sounded like the plot of a thriller novel, but the fear in Emily's eyes was absolutely real. What if, Jack said slowly, what if we went to Odessa together? What if we found out what David left for you? Emily stared at him in shock. Jack, you don't understand what you're suggesting. If I'm right about what happened, then anyone who helps me could be putting themselves in danger. You have your own life, your own responsibilities. Maybe, Jack replied, surprising himself with his certainty. But I've been driving these roads for 20 years, delivering other people's cargo, living other people's schedules. For the first time in a long time, I have a chance to do something that really matters. Inside the diner, they could hear Don cleaning up after the evening customers, the familiar sounds of dishes and conversation that marked the end of another day. But for Jack and Emily, sitting under the vast desert sky, it felt more like the beginning of something that would test everything they thought they knew about courage, trust, and the price of seeking truth in a world where some secrets were worth killing to protect. Chapter 5. The Road to Truth. The next morning dawned with the crisp clarity that only desert air could provide. Jack had barely slept, his mind racing, with the implications of Emily's story and the decision he had made to help her uncover the truth. As he loaded his truck for the journey to Odessa, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, like a familiar but heavier cargo. Don had prepared breakfast for everyone, and as they sat in the early morning quiet of the diner, Jack noticed how different Emily seemed. The desperate exhaustion that had marked her features when he first found her had been replaced by something harder, determination mixed with fear, but determination nonetheless. I've been thinking about what you said last night, Emily said, cutting her pancakes into small pieces for Sophie. About going to Odessa. Are you sure you understand what you're offering? This isn't just a favor for a stranded family anymore. Jack set down his coffee cup and looked directly at her. Emily, I've spent 20 years of my life moving other people's things from one place to another. Important things, valuable things, but none of it ever felt like it mattered in any real way. What happened to your husband, what's happening to you and your children, that matters. Michael, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation while coloring in his notebook, suddenly spoke up. Are we going to find out why Daddy had to go away? The innocent question from her son seemed to strengthen Emily's resolve. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to find out the truth about Daddy. Don approached their table with a thermos of coffee and a bag of sandwiches. Road food, he explained, and this. He handed Emily a cell phone. It's an old one, but it works. My number's programmed in. If you need anything at all, you call me. Emily took the phone with hands that trembled slightly. Don, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You don't need to thank me, Don replied. Just be careful, all of you. If what you've told Jack is true, then there are people who have already proven they're willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their secrets. As they prepared to leave, Jack found himself studying the family that had become his responsibility. Sophie clutched her stuffed rabbit, chattering excitedly about riding in the big truck again. Michael had packed his notebook and colored pencils, carefully in a small backpack that Don had given him. Emily moved with purposeful efficiency, but Jack could see the tension in her movements, the way her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. The drive to Odessa would take most of the day, even pushing the legal limits of driving time. Jack had contacted his dispatcher again, this time claiming that his mechanical problems were more serious than initially thought and that he was stranded waiting for parts. The lies were accumulating, and he knew that his employment with the company was probably in jeopardy, but the knowledge bothered him less than he expected. As they pulled onto the highway, Emily sat in the passenger seat with Sophie on her lap, while Michael knelt on the sleeper berth behind them, fascinated by the view from the truck's high vantage point. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert landscape, and the familiar rhythm of the road began to work its calming effect on Jack's nerves. "Tell me more about Marcus Rodriguez," Jack said after they had been driving for an hour. "What was his relationship with David like?" Emily adjusted Sophie's position and thought for a moment. They were like brothers. They went through basic training together, deployed together twice. Marcus was David's best man. At our wedding, after Michael was born, Marcus became his godfather. She paused, watching the landscape roll by outside the window. Marcus was single, no family to speak of. He used to joke that we were the closest thing to a family he had. When he died, David took it very hard. But it was more than grief. It was like David felt responsible for something he couldn't fix. "Did Marcus ever mention anything unusual about their work?" Jack asked. "Not directly," Emily replied, "but about 2 months before the end of their deployment, both David and Marcus started acting differently when they called home. They seemed nervous, excited, and scared all at the same time. David would start to tell me something, then stop himself and change the subject." Michael, who had been listening from the back, suddenly spoke up. "Uncle Marcus gave me a present before he went away. He said it was special, that I should keep it safe for Daddy." Emily turned in her seat to look at her son. "Michael, you never told me about a present from Uncle Marcus. What kind of present?" Michael reached into his backpack and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. As he unwrapped it, Jack could see it was a military challenge coin, a thick metal disc about the size of a silver dollar with intricate designs on both sides. Emily took the coin and examined it closely. "This isn't a standard unit coin," she said slowly. "I don't recognize these symbols." Jack glanced at the coin while keeping his attention on the road. The design was indeed unusual. Instead of the typical military unit insignia, this coin bore symbols that looked more like a combination of corporate logos and foreign military markings. "Marcus told me it was from a special mission," Michael continued. "He said that someday, when I was older, Daddy would explain what it meant. But then, Uncle Marcus had his accident, and Daddy got sad, and then Daddy had his accident too." The simple, matter-of-fact way Michael described the sequence of events was heartbreaking, but Jack recognized that the boy had processed the losses in the way children do, accepting the facts while not fully understanding their implications. Emily turned the coin over in her hands, studying both sides intently. "Jack, I think this might be connected to whatever David left in the safety deposit box. Marcus wouldn't have given this to Michael unless it was important." As they continued driving, Jack found himself thinking about the strange chain of events that had brought him into this situation. Yesterday morning, he had been a simple truck driver focused on making deliveries on time. Now he was traveling across 2 states with a family that might be running from people dangerous enough to commit violence to protect their secrets. The truck's CB radio crackled with the usual chatter between drivers, weather updates, traffic reports, warnings about speed traps. But underneath the familiar routine, Jack felt the weight of the unknown stretching ahead of them. Whatever they found in that safety deposit box in Odessa, he had the feeling it would change all their lives, irrevocably. "Emily," Jack said quietly, "before we get to the bank, I need you to understand something. Once we open that box, once we see what David left for you, there's no going back. If your suspicions are right, if there really are people who killed to protect this secret, then knowing the truth might make all of us targets." Emily was quiet for a long moment, looking down at the challenge coin in her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and determined. "Jack, for over a year, I've been running from shadows, afraid of my own thoughts, questioning everything I believed about the man I married. My children have been paying the price for my fear and uncertainty." She looked up at him, her eyes blazing with resolve. Whatever's in that box, whatever David discovered that cost him and Marcus, their lives I need to know. Not just for me, but for Michael and Sophie. They deserve to know the truth about their father, even if that truth is dangerous. As they crossed the state line into Texas, Jack felt a strange sense of destiny settling over him. The desert was behind them now, replaced by the rolling hills and oil derricks that marked the approach to Odessa. Somewhere in that city, in a small metal box in a bank vault, lay answers that multiple people had died to conceal. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the windshield when the skyline of Odessa appeared on the horizon, and Jack knew that within hours, they would either find the truth they were seeking or discover that some secrets were too dangerous for ordinary people to uncover. Chapter 6. Secrets Unveiled. The First National Bank of Odessa stood like a fortress of red brick and steel in the heart of the city's financial district. As Jack parked his truck in the adjacent lot, Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the safety deposit box key that had been hidden in her purse for over a year. The weight of the moment pressed down on all of them. Even the children seemed to sense that they were approaching something momentous. "Are you ready for this?" Jack asked softly, studying Emily's pale face. She took a deep breath and nodded. "I've been carrying this key and wondering about its contents for 13 months. I can't run from it anymore." They left the children in the truck with juice boxes and coloring books, positioning the vehicle where Emily could see them through the bank's windows. Jack's presence seemed to give her the courage she needed as they approached the imposing entrance of the financial institution. The bank manager, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patterson, was professionally courteous, but clearly curious about why someone would wait over a year to access a safety deposit box. Emily provided the required identification and death certificate, her hands steady, despite the magnitude of what they were about to discover. "Box 847 was rented by your husband 3 years ago," Mrs. Patterson explained as she led them through the vault's security procedures. "The rental is paid up through next year. He was very specific about the access conditions. Only you, and only after a minimum of 12 months following his passing." The safety deposit box was larger than Jack had expected, about the size of a shoebox, and surprisingly heavy when Mrs. Patterson placed it on the examination table in the private viewing room. Emily stared at it for a long moment, before inserting the key with hands that shook slightly. Inside, they found a collection of items that immediately explained why David Carter had been so concerned about his family's safety. There were photographs, dozens of them, showing military personnel loading unmarked crates onto civilian trucks. The images were clearly taken covertly from concealed positions and showed faces that Emily recognized as members of David's unit. Beneath the photographs was a thick manila envelope containing documents that made Jack's blood run cold. Shipping, manifests, inventory reports, and correspondence between military officers and representatives of private corporations, all documenting the systematic theft and sale of military equipment and supplies intended for Iraqi reconstruction efforts. "Oh, my God," Emily whispered as she read through the papers. David and Marcus weren't involved in smuggling. They were documenting it. They were gathering evidence of a massive theft operation. The scope of the corruption was staggering. According to the documents, millions of dollars worth of equipment, weapons and supplies had been diverted from their intended purposes and sold to private buyers. The operation involved officers at multiple levels of command and had been ongoing for at least 2 years. At the bottom of the box was a letter in David's handwriting addressed to Emily. Jack watched her face as she read it, seeing a mixture of vindication, grief, and growing anger cross her features. "What does it say?" Jack asked gently. Emily's voice was steady but filled with emotion as she read aloud. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then my fears have come true, and those responsible for the theft have decided that Marcus and I know too much to be allowed to live. The evidence in this box represents months of careful documentation. Marcus and I discovered the operation by accident, but once we understood what was happening, we knew we had to act." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes before continuing. We tried to report it through proper channels, but it became clear that the corruption reached high enough to block any official investigation. We made copies of everything and planned to go to the media, but Marcus was killed before we could act. I know it wasn't an accident, just as I know that if you're reading this, my own fate has been the same. The letter continued with specific instructions for Emily, contact information for investigative journalists, attorneys who specialized in military corruption cases, and detailed explanations of what each piece of evidence represented. David had essentially created a complete case file that could bring down everyone involved in the theft operation. "There's more," Emily said, reaching into the box one final time. She pulled out a small digital recorder and a USB drive. David says the recorder contains conversations with the officers involved, admissions of guilt, and details about how the operation worked. The USB drive has digital copies of everything: photographs, documents, financial records. Jack felt a chill as he realized the full implications of what they had discovered. This wasn't just evidence of corruption. It was a complete blueprint for exposing a criminal conspiracy that had already claimed at least 2 lives and had left Emily and her children as potential targets. "Emily," Jack said carefully, "this evidence could destroy careers, send people to prison, and cost others millions of dollars. The people involved aren't going to simply accept exposure quietly." "I know," Emily replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But don't you see? This explains everything. Why the investigators questioned David's integrity, why our benefits were delayed, why I couldn't get help from any official sources. Someone has been working very hard to discredit David's reputation and isolate our family." As they carefully repacked the evidence, Jack's mind raced through the implications. Emily was right. The systematic destruction of her support network made perfect sense if powerful people were trying to ensure that David's widow never gained access to this information, or that if she did, no one would believe her. "What do we do now?" Jack asked. Emily held up the letter and pointed to a name David had underlined multiple times. "David recommends starting with this person, Sarah Chen, an investigative reporter with the Washington Herald. He says she's already been investigating military corruption and would understand the significance of this evidence." They left the bank with the evidence securely packed in Emily's bag, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they walked back to the truck, he found himself scanning the parking lot and nearby buildings, looking for anything that seemed out of place. "Mama," Sophie called out as they approached the truck. "A man came and asked Michael questions about you." Jack felt his blood freeze as Emily rushed to the truck. Michael was pale but appeared unharmed, still sitting in the passenger seat where they had left him. "What kind of man?" Emily asked urgently. "What did he want to know?" "He had a suit and a badge," Michael replied. "He asked where you went and why we were in Odessa. I told him we were just traveling with our friend Jack, but he kept asking about Daddy and whether you had been to any banks." Emily and Jack exchanged a look of alarm. Someone had been watching them, waiting for them to access the safety deposit box. The revelation meant that their movements were being monitored, and the evidence they now carried made them immediate targets. "We need to leave," Jack said quietly. "Now." As they pulled out of the parking lot, Jack caught sight of a black sedan that seemed to fall into traffic behind them. The vehicle maintained a careful distance, but its presence confirmed his worst fears. They were no longer just seeking the truth about David Carter's investigation. They were now part of the story, and the people who had killed to protect their secrets knew exactly where to find them. "Emily," Jack said as he navigated through Odessa's afternoon traffic, "I think it's time to call that reporter. We're not safe carrying this evidence alone, and if something happens to us, the truth dies. With us." Emily nodded, clutching her bag tightly. David was right about everything, and now we're the ones they're going to try to silence. Behind them, the black sedan maintained its position, a dark reminder that their journey toward truth had transformed them from seekers into targets, and that the real danger was just beginning. Chapter: Stay on the road to justice. The next few hours unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between hunted and hunters. Jack used every trick he had learned in 20 years of long-haul trucking to lose the black sedan, taking unexpected exits, doubling back through truck stops, and using the size and visibility of his rig to his advantage in ways that smaller vehicles couldn't match. Emily, meanwhile, had managed to reach Sarah Chen at the Washington Herald. The investigative reporter's voice had grown increasingly excited as Emily described the evidence they had discovered, and she agreed to meet them at a secure location in Dallas, where she could examine the materials and begin the process of corroborating David's findings. She says she's been investigating this same corruption network for 8 months, Emily explained to Jack as they drove through the Texas countryside. She already had pieces of the puzzle, but David's evidence provides the missing connections that can tie everything together. In the back of the cab, Michael and Sophie had fallen asleep, exhausted by the tension and uncertainty of the day. Looking at them in the rearview mirror, Jack felt a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. These children had already lost their father to this conspiracy. He was determined that they wouldn't lose their mother as well. The meeting with Sarah Chen took place in the parking lot of a 24-hour truck stop outside Dallas. She was a small, intense woman in her 30s, with the sharp eyes of someone who had spent years uncovering truths that powerful people preferred to keep hidden. When Emily showed her the contents of the safety deposit box, her professional composure gave way to obvious excitement. "This is extraordinary," Chen said, photographing documents with a high-resolution camera. "Your husband and his friend documented everything: financial transfers, shipping records, even recorded conversations with the perpetrators. This isn't just evidence of theft, it's a complete case file that could result in dozens of prosecutions." She looked up at Emily with respect and sympathy. "Your husband was incredibly brave. He and Marcus Rodriguez were essentially conducting an undercover investigation without any official support or protection. They knew the risks, but they did it anyway because it was the right thing to do." Emily wiped tears from her eyes, but Jack could see that they were tears of vindication rather than grief. For over a year, she had carried the burden of wondering whether her husband had been the corrupt soldier that investigators suggested, or the honorable man she had married. David's evidence proved definitively that he had been a hero who paid the ultimate price for his integrity. "What happens now?" Jack asked. Chen smiled grimly. "Now we publish the truth. My editor has been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence. Within 72 hours, this story will be on the front page of every major newspaper in the country. The people responsible for David's investigation will find themselves under investigation by federal authorities who can't be bought or intimidated." As if summoned by their conversation about justice, Jack's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We know where you are. Return what you stole or suffer the same fate as Carter and Rodriguez." Emily read the message over Jack's shoulder and laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "They still don't understand. David didn't steal anything. He exposed their theft, and now the whole world is going to know what they did." Chen took photos of the threatening message as additional evidence. "This actually helps our case," she explained. "It proves that the people involved are still actively trying to suppress the truth, which supports your theory about how David and Marcus died." The next few days passed in a blur of interviews, document verification, and careful coordination with federal investigators who had been brought into the case by Chen's newspaper. Emily and the children stayed in a safe house arranged by the FBI, while Jack found himself testifying before a grand jury about his role in helping Emily access the evidence. The story broke on a Thursday morning with a headline that stretched across the entire front page of the Washington Herald. "Military corruption network exposed. Fallen soldiers were heroes, not criminals." The article detailed the entire conspiracy, named the officers involved, and included photographs of the evidence that David and Marcus had died to preserve. Within hours, the story had been picked up by every major news outlet in the country. Military officials announced the immediate suspension of everyone named in David's documentation, and the Department of Justice launched a comprehensive investigation that would eventually result in dozens of indictments. 3 weeks later, Jack found himself back at Don's Desert Haven, but this time as a customer, rather than someone seeking refuge. Emily and the children were with him, but their circumstances had changed dramatically. The military had posthumously honored David Carter and Marcus Rodriguez for their courage in exposing the corruption, and Emily had been awarded full benefits and compensation for the year of hardship her family had endured. More importantly, the threat that had hung over them was gone. The people who had orchestrated David's investigation were either in custody or under indictment, their power to hurt anyone else permanently broken. "So what's next for you?" Dawn asked, as they sat on the same porch where Emily had first told Jack the truth about her husband's suspicious demise. Emily smiled, the first truly relaxed smile Jack had seen from her. "I've been offered a job with an organization that helps military families navigate benefits and support systems. Apparently, my experience with bureaucratic obstruction has given me unique qualifications for the work." Michael, who was once, again drawing in his notebook, looked up from his artwork. "And Jack is going to visit us in our new house. He promised to teach me how to drive a truck when I'm old enough." Jack laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "That's a few years away, buddy, but I promise I'll be around." The truth was that Jack's life had changed as fundamentally as Emily's. His willingness to help a stranded family had cost him his job with the trucking company, but it had led to something more valuable, a sense of purpose that went beyond simply moving cargo from one place to another. Sarah Chen had offered him a position as a freelance investigator, using his knowledge of highways and truck stops to help her research stories about issues affecting working-class Americans. It wasn't the steady paycheck he was accustomed to, but it was work that mattered in ways that went beyond financial compensation. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors that had marked their first evening together, Jack reflected on the strange journey that had brought them all to this moment. A routine drive had become an adventure, a chance encounter had become a friendship, and a simple act of kindness had helped expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command. "You know," Emily said, watching Sophie chase lizards in the desert brush while Michael showed Don his latest drawings. "David would have liked you. He always said that the measure of a person wasn't what they accomplished when everyone was watching, but what they did when they thought no one would ever know." Jack nodded, understanding that he had been given a gift more valuable than any paycheck, the knowledge that when faced with a choice between the easy path and the right path, he had chosen correctly. In the distance, a truck horn echoed across the desert, the lonely sound that had been the soundtrack to Jack's adult life. But now, instead of calling him back to a solitary existence on the highways, it sounded like a celebration, a recognition that the road ahead, whatever it might bring, would be traveled in the company of people who mattered. Fim da Historia. Dear friends, we hope that Jack and Emily's story has moved you as much as it moved us. This tale of courage, truth, and the power of human kindness reminds us that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they choose to act with compassion and integrity. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to join our community by subscribing to our channel and giving this video a like. Share with us in the comments below. From which city are you watching us? Have you ever experienced a moment when a stranger's kindness changed your life? We read every comment and love hearing your own stories of hope and human connection. Every day we bring you new stories that explore the complexity of life, the strength of the human spirit, and the unexpected ways that our paths cross with others. Don't miss our upcoming content. Hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest releases. Thank you for taking this emotional journey with us. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories that matter, stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the incredible impact we can have on each other's lives. Until our next story, remember that every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change someone's world.